The new Apple TV Plus smash hit Murderbot wrapped up its first season on July 11th and has already been renewed for a second season. The story so far is based on All Systems Red, the first novella in Martha Wells' award-winning sci-fi series The Murderbot Diaries. Both the book and show follow a security robot who has hacked its governor module, and despite naming itself Murderbot, it just wants to be left alone to watch its favorite TV shows. But when the humans it has been sent to protect run into trouble exploring a deserted planet, Murderbot must help the crew discover the truth about who's sabotaging them, or else they might all die. So why do people love this grumpy Murderbot so much? My name is Ellie Blackwood. I'm a sci-fi and fantasy writer in progress, and today we're going to explore the secrets behind the success of the Murderbot franchise. My biggest gripe about the Murderbot TV show is that I want more of it. I won't be talking about big spoilers for the book or TV show here, so if you're interested in experiencing them for yourself, this video won't ruin the surprises. I'm a relative newcomer to the Murderbot franchise, having only picked up the series this year, but I'm super excited to discuss it with others. If you've read or watched Murderbot, or if you're thinking about it, let me know in the comments. And if you like video essays about books, science fiction, Doctor Who, and all that goodness, be sure to subscribe to my channel. We're just a few hundred away from hitting 10,000 subscribers, and that's really exciting to me. So if you like my stuff, it would mean a lot if you followed along. To keep up with all my projects and content, as well as getting access to all my YouTube video essays before anyone else, also be sure to subscribe to my monthly newsletter, which you can find linked in the description. I'll get into the differences between the Murderbot books and TV show throughout this video. But as far as the plot, Season 1 of Murderbot follows the broad strokes of All Systems Red quite closely, although some logistical details are altered or switched around. The core appeal of both the book and the show is the same, the character of Murderbot itself. So we have to begin our deep dive by asking, why a robot? A lot of common science fiction concepts are popular not just because they're cool, but because they're also convenient vehicles for exploring themes that are relevant to our society. Broadly speaking, science fiction writers tend to use artificial intelligence to explore one of two themes. On the one hand, they can use AI to explore the possibilities and dangers of advanced technology, such as with the antagonistic AI HAL 9000 in 2001: A Space Odyssey. I'm currently working on a sci-fi novel that involves AI that falls into this category. On the other hand, AI can be used to explore the nature of humanity, questioning whether it's our organic bodies that give us personhood or something deeper within our consciousness. Stories like Blade Runner and indeed Murderbot fall into this category. Admittedly, some science fiction stories blur the lines between these two themes. One of my favorite films, Ex Machina, can be read both ways, though I personally lean more toward the interpretation that it's about the nature of humanity. Let me know in the comments if you'd be interested in seeing a video of me yapping about Ex Machina. Suffice to say, the character of Murderbot is so compelling precisely because it's so human. The Murderbot Diaries are certainly entertaining, action-packed science fiction, but their main draw is as a character study. Murderbot is a construct created from a mix of robotic parts and cloned organic material, created by the all-encompassing company. In our modern world, thinking about AI often brings up thoughts of generative AI tools like ChatGPT, but this really wasn't a salient issue when All Systems Red came out in 2017. In a recent interview, Martha Wells said, "Murderbot is a machine intelligence, and ChatGPT is not. It's called artificial intelligence as a marketing tool, but it's not actually artificial intelligence. I still think we're probably years and years and years away from anyone creating an actual artificial intelligence." Wells was inspired by Ann Leckie's book Ancillary Justice, which is about an AI starship that gets trapped in a human body and misses the access to all the ship's systems that she previously had. So Murderbot's perception of the world comes partly through security feeds and data sources other than what it sees through its eyes, including sometimes drones that it controls itself. Incidentally, Ann Leckie has the primary blurb on the front of All Systems Red that simply says, "I love Murderbot." A common trope for sci-fi artificial intelligence is to have the AI turn on the humans and try to kill them, either in a misguided attempt to fulfill its mission or as a way of trying to free itself. Despite naming itself Murderbot, our protagonist isn't naturally violent, preferring to watch endless hours of media to escape from a world that doesn't afford it any real agency. Murderbot notes in All Systems Red that the media it watches usually involves sect units like itself trying to kill all the humans if their governor module is turned off. Of course, this isn't true to how sect units actually behave, as we can see from Murderbot's own benevolent actions to protect its human friends. Wells noted in an interview with New Scientist that this media purposely feeds into the corporation Rim's agenda of convincing the human populace that they have to keep sec units controlled or else they'll be in danger. This is a narrative that Murderbot itself seems to have internalized. The very first line in All Systems Red is, "I could have become a mass murderer after I hacked my governor module, but then I realized I could access the combined feed of entertainment channels carried on the company's satellites." It defaults to assuming no governor module means mass murderer, even though by its own admission it's much more content to watch media. Given its continual throwaway references to how it could totally kill all the humans if it wanted to, it seems Murderbot has continued subconsciously believing this narrative about itself from the media it watches. It just goes to show how difficult it is for Murderbot to exist in a world designed to keep it subservient. Even though Murderbot and its fellow security units, or sec units, are artificial constructs, the very fact that they need to have a governor module to make them follow orders shows that they are actually sentient beings who are enslaved. The team which Murderbot is assisting in All Systems Red hails from the Preservation Alliance, a free world outside the company-controlled corporation Rim where constructs have the same legal rights as humans, and they are appalled by how the company treats Murderbot. When writing these constructs for her story, Wells draws from the very origin of the word robot, the 1920 play RUR, Rossum's Universal Robots, by Carol Chapek. In this play, a company creates workers using artificial organic matter, and these constructs eventually rebel against the humans. The constructs in RUR are called robots, deriving their name from the Czech word for forced labor, robota. It's interesting that in modern times, robot means a machine made entirely from artificial parts, but Murderbot is kind of closer to the original definition of robot from RUR than what we would normally consider to be a robot. Delivering the 2024 Jack Williamson lecture at Eastern New Mexico University, Wells said, "There are a lot of people who viewed All Systems Red as a cute robot story, which was very weird to me since I thought I was writing a story about slavery and personhood and bodily autonomy. But humans have always been really good at ignoring things we don't want to pay attention to, which is also a theme in the Murderbot series." In the same lecture, Wells quoted Ann Leckie as saying, "AI Takes Over is essentially a slave revolt story that casts slaves defending their lives and/or seeking to be treated as sentient beings as super powerful, super strong villains who must be prevented from destroying humanity. It sets a pattern for how we react to real-world oppressed populations, reinforces the idea that oppressed populations seeking justice are actually an existential threat." In case there was any doubt about Wells using the company's treatment of constructs as a metaphor for how humans have been treated in real life, the company also keeps countless humans in indentured servitude. The corporation Rim is an awful, oppressive place for humans and constructs alike. Wells created the world of Murderbot by taking modern-day issues to their logical extreme, saying, "It's set in a far future which is an extrapolation of what happens when you don't have labor unions and corporations have more human rights than actual humans." Without getting into the spoilery specifics, the story of Murderbot shows our protagonist repeatedly fighting against forces that want to put it back under their control. This is shown both in terms of people trying to force Murderbot to do things and in more subtle ways. There's the obvious threat that Murderbot can't let anyone know that it's hacked its governor module and must keep doing what the humans tell it because the company still keeps track of it 24/7 and would punish it if they knew the truth. As another example, Murderbot states in both the book and the show that it's more comfortable in its armor, where it doesn't have to school its expression a certain way or look people in the eye. However, in the show, Murderbot's repair cubicle gives it absolutely no privacy, and nor does the camera, which unceremoniously captures Murderbot's entire naked body. This isn't necessarily embarrassing to Murderbot in the same way that it would be to a human, but it's still incredibly invasive according to Murderbot's own comfort levels. In All Systems Red, Murderbot goes on a journey of figuring out what it really wants out of life after a whole existence of having no say in the matter. And Murderbot's primary weapon against efforts to control it is its strong sense of its own identity. When we first meet Murderbot in All Systems Red, it has already hacked its governor module 35,000 hours ago, or about 4 Earth years. During that time, it might not have learned everything about itself, but it begins All Systems Red as quite a well-defined individual. In the show, we see a brief prologue of Murderbot hacking the governor module, but by the time the main plot picks up, Murderbot has the same strong sense of personality we see in the book. Murderbot's narrative voice in the book is very distinctive and unmistakably its own. In particular, I was struck by how Murderbot tends to narrate fast-paced action scenes with the same deadpan tone as the rest of the story. which makes total sense for the character but takes a bit of getting used to. The audiobook is really good at maintaining this deadpan tone while also using strategically placed pauses and extended vowels to indicate heightened tension or emotion. The books focus heavily on Murderbot's interiority with an intimate first-person point of view that takes the reader directly inside its head. This carries over into the show with Murderbot's frequent voiceovers, and even though Murderbot doesn't outwardly emote very much, Alexander Skarsgård gives a masterclass performance in subtle yet impactful acting. Someone give the Emmy for Best Acting to Alexander Skarsgård's eyes specifically. Murderbot's social awkwardness and challenges picking up on human social cues provide a sense of relatability to many neurodivergent fans. Speaking about the way Murderbot processes emotions, Wells said, "A lot of these aspects of the character came from the way my own brain works. I didn't realize how non-neurotypical I was until I started writing Murderbot and other non-neurotypical people talked to me about it, and that explained a lot about my life, actually." Murderbot has no gender identity, a perception that's admittedly easier to maintain if you're reading the books on paper. The first book gives no indication of what Murderbot looks like under its armor, so while you can't necessarily know someone's gender just by looking at them, the reader isn't even tempted to try and give Murderbot a gender based off its appearance. In later books, when Murderbot has to list its gender for a feed ID, it describes its gender as indeterminate or not applicable. However, given that the audiobook is narrated by the fantastic Kevin R. Free and Murderbot in the show is played by Alexander Skarsgård, it can be tempting to think of it as a man if you're used to these formats. Indeed, despite having read the book on paper before watching the show, I caught myself referring to Murderbot as he several times when discussing the show with my friends. It's a pretty humbling reminder that in our society, we're conditioned to relentlessly assign a gender to people we just met, and that even holds for a fictional robot that explicitly has no gender. There's a reason why many non-binary readers relate to Murderbot's total refusal to accept a gender. Additionally, many asexual and aromantic people relate to Murderbot's lack of interest in romantic and sexual relationships. However, Murderbot can't really be thought of as good non-binary, autistic, asexual, or aromantic representation because Murderbot isn't human. As critic Alex Brown wrote in their review of Murderbot's premiere, neurodivergent, non-binary, and asexual spectrum people have long battled the stereotype of us being emotionless robots. Finding camaraderie with a fictional robot is complicated, but for me, I feel okay about it precisely because Wells shows Murderbot being more than a cold machine devoid of feelings. But I also respect that some feel troubled by that representation. Fortunately, there is much more marginalized representation in traditional publishing in 2025 than in 2017 when All Systems Red was published. Well, not a lot, but more than the near-nothing we had. The show also helps mitigate this in the case of non-binary representation because the human character Pin Lee is non-binary, unlike in the books where the character is a woman who uses she/her pronouns. This helps avoid any insinuation from the show that non-binary people are inherently inhuman. I don't know whether the creators decided to gender bend Pin Lee to provide an example of a human non-binary character, or simply because Pin Lee's actor Sabrina Wu is non-binary, but it's still a nice touch. I'm not accusing Wells of hating non-binary people, to be clear. The books themselves feature non-binary human characters too, just not in the first one. Whether or not Murderbot counts as particularly good representation for certain identities, I think it's fair to say that the character has helped many people from all different walks of life feel less alone by reflecting their experience back at them. As I mentioned before, seeing negative stereotypes of themselves in media can make people internalize negative things about themselves, such as how Murderbot keeps joking about being a killing machine because that's the only narrative it sees about constructs in the media it watches. But seeing a well-written character in media with an experience similar to your own, especially if it's an experience that isn't often represented in media, can help you feel like part of the adventure and make you feel less isolated. In a 2019 review of All Systems Red, critic Jason Sheehan wrote, "There are subtext to be read into Murderbot, that its experience is a coming out narrative, that it mirrors the lives of trans people, immigrants, those on the autism spectrum, or anyone else who feels the need to hide some essential part of themselves from a population that either threatens or can't possibly understand them, or both. And I get all of that because every one of those reads is right. It's the wonder of the character, that something so alien can be so human, that everyone who has ever had to hide in a crowded room, avert their eyes from power, cocoon themselves in media for comfort, or lie AI to survive can relate. Murderbot's love of media isn't just because it provides an escape, but also because the behavior of humans in the shows it watches gives Murderbot a starting point for understanding real humans better. For example, when Murderbot has to help coax a shell-shocked human back to the habitat, it uses a similar situation in an episode of its favorite show, The Rise and Fall of Sanctuary Moon, to help it decide what to do. One of the most fun aspects of the TV show was seeing Sanctuary Moon come to life. It's sort of styled as a hyper-cheesy Star Trek, but because the show is already set in an advanced sci-fi future, it would probably be more akin to a modern soap opera. Wells's original concept for the show was how to get away with murder in space. The books don't take up too much time with fleshing out the world and characters of Sanctuary Moon, so the show takes some creative liberties in that regard. There's a storyline in the Sanctuary Moon show where the ship's navigation unit and the captain fall in love with each other, which felt like an intentionally ridiculous and problematic plot point given that the captain has so much power over the navigation unit. But while Murderbot rightfully shows disdain for the stereotypical depiction of constructs in human media, the show weaves scenes of the navigation unit in Sanctuary Moon displaying more autonomy as Murderbot grows to take more agency over its own story. Personally, I took this to mean that for all of Sanctuary Moon's faults, Murderbot found some inspiration in seeing a fictional navigation unit growing beyond its original purpose and making decisions for itself. This parallels the way that real-life people find encouragement in seeing Murderbot exercise its own autonomy. Part of what makes Murderbot so powerfully relatable to some people is that it is unapologetically itself, refusing to change its nature for the sake of some silly humans, even if it has to hide sometimes. As Wells said in her Jack Williamson lecture, a lot of the stories where AI want to become human are great stories, but they can also be interpreted as having to change your fundamental nature in order to be happy. Most of us are pretty okay with our fundamental nature, it's the world our fundamental nature occupies that's often the problem. So when I started working on the story that turned into All Systems Red, I realized right away that I wanted to write an AI that didn't want to be human. This is probably why so many people find inspiration in Murderbot. It's ultimately a story about refusing to conform and connecting with others on your own terms. It's a story about how all people, including sentient constructs, deserve to be accepted as they are. But while Murderbot is an incredibly strong central character, part of the story's success, especially in the show, also comes down to the people surrounding Murderbot. The Preservation Alliance team that Murderbot has to help in All Systems Red are cool characters to spend time with, but we don't learn all that much about them because the book is from Murderbot's perspective, and Murderbot just doesn't care about their personal lives. The TV show expands the focus of the narrative to flesh out the humans much more than they are in the book. It accomplishes this partly by reducing the crew down to just 5, eliminating the characters Oversea and Valescu and distributing their role to the other characters. I mentioned earlier that there's a scene where Murderbot helps one of the humans back to the habitat by drawing from a technique it saw in an episode of Sanctuary Moon. In the book, the character who needs rescuing in this manner is Valescu, but in the show, it's Arada. Similarly, in the book, Arada's partner is Oversea, but in the show, she's married to Pin Lee. If I had one criticism about the show, I think the portrayal of the crew members as silly, naive hippies might have been a bit over the top. In the books, they're certainly portrayed as a little unconventional compared to the ruthless capitalist ideology of the Corporation Rim, but their main character traits that we see on the page are intelligence and competence. Murderbot's disdain for their silly human complexities is mentioned in a throwaway line in All Systems Red without many examples of the specific silly behavior because Murderbot just doesn't care to pay attention. In the end, the show's focus on the team's humor, emotions, and inexperience in some situations wasn't something that bothered me over much, especially when I got used to the specific brand of humor the show was going for. In the book, most of the humor comes from Murderbot being sassy and sarcastic, and that's certainly present in the show too. But the show also draws some of its humor from the human cast being kind of bumbling, even if they are also shown to be quite book smart. Because of this, I would classify the show as kind of a comedy sci-fi, but I wouldn't classify the book that way. My favorite character in both the book and the show is Dr. Mensa, the leader of the expedition. In the show, Mensa is shown to struggle with panic attacks, something the showrunners were inspired to add because of a detail in later Murderbot books where it is revealed that Mensa developed anxiety because of the trauma of the expedition in All Systems Red. I found getting this insight into Mensa's private struggles in the show made me like her even more because of how hard she works to support her team despite her own problems. Mensa epitomizes what non-authoritarian leadership can look like. Back home in the Preservation Alliance, she's something like a president, and she is a perfect representative of the Preservation Alliance as a whole. In an interview with Aaron Underwood, Martha Wells explained, "Preservation is a place that's trying to be better, and in a lot of respects it's much, much better. It's trying to be equitable and a place that cares for everyone, and it's still working towards that." Similarly, Mensa isn't perfect, and she sometimes makes inaccurate assumptions about what Murderbot wants or needs, but she does her best to try and understand and help Murderbot. Another character I surprisingly loved in the show was Garathan, an augmented human who is skeptical of Murderbot at first. I thought he was fine in the book, but I came to adore his portrayal on screen. Especially in the last episode, which introduces some extra danger that wasn't present in the book and allows Garathan to really shine as he helps save the day. In a piece for Reactor magazine, Leah Schnellbach explains, "In the end we watch the person who was the most twisted by Corporation Rim's capitalist machine define himself by the gifts he gives freely to his friends. Through Garathan, the show is able to ask, how much free will can even a human person really have under a system that sees them only as a resource to be exploited?" And I didn't really feel one way or another about Rathi in the book, but in the show he's such a sweetheart that I couldn't help liking him. While I'm looking forward to continuing the Murderbot book series, there are something like 8 books in total to enjoy, I can't help feeling like I'm going to really miss the show versions of the human characters until they return in season 2. That season really cannot come soon enough for me. In an interview with Nexus Point News, the showrunners mentioned that they're considering adapting multiple Murderbot novellas for season 2, meaning that the next season may be more action-packed and have longer episodes than season 1. The episodes in season 1 were only about 30 minutes long, if that, and I'm really glad I started watching the show when it was almost all out because I would have gotten so impatient waiting a week for every single episode. A couple of story hooks from later books in the series were referenced in this first season, so the show is well set to explore those. As for new written material, Martha Wells released a new Murderbot short story on July 10th called Rapport, Friendship, Solidarity, Communion, Empathy. The next novella in the series, Platform Decay, is scheduled for May 2026. It is certainly an excellent time to be a Murderbot fan. Have you read or watched any Murderbot, or are you planning to start? Let me know in the comments. If you liked this video, be sure to subscribe to my channel and subscribe to my monthly newsletter for early access to all my videos. The link to that is in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.